Hey, everybody. This is Megan.
And this is Stephen.
And this is the Synchrony podcast, where we talk about how to transform apostolic dating culture and end loneliness in the church. And we're picking up the second part of a very long discussion of our relationship. Let's start off by saying this, though, before we recap, because I was thinking about it a minute ago. We don't want to prescribe our relationship as the standard.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. So this is not us being date exactly the way we did and break up and then get married.
Everyone break up with your significant other right now.
Right. So please, I don't want people messaging us and being like, I dumped my boyfriend thanks to you. We're not here to prescribe it, but we want you to have context for why we feel like this work is so important.
Yeah.
So we're going to pick up and talk about how our dating decisions informed our married life. And so in our last episode, we talked about how we started dating, what led us to break up, and then the soul searching and really what it was values identification that we did while we were apart that led us to decide to come back together. And we ended by talking about deciding to meet up halfway between our two cities for a very awkward and cold date. So we had dinner and then we kind of went out and sat down and were like, should we get back together? And when I tell you that it was like a business deal, we both liked each other. We were happy to be there. We were cordial. It was a happy occasion, but there were no fireworks and butterflies on my end at all.
My end either.
Yeah. I was kind of coming into it with the feeling of okay, right now I'm not feeling a lot of romance or even attraction. I found you attractive as a person, and I knew that the attraction could be there, but it wasn't like I was, I don't know, drooling.
No, yeah. You weren't listening to your hormones.
Yeah. They weren't really there. All of the romance kind of, buttons that were normally going off in a relationship weren't part of this.
Yeah. What we want y'all to get out of this is that this is the foundation for our marriage as it stands today. Because what that process did for us is hopefully going to let you avoid that process.
Yeah.
And what it did for us was help us identify that values and alignment in who we are and what we do together is what the core of a marriage could look like.
Right.
And we had to find out that way. Mm-hmm. But hopefully this podcast will help you guys see what we've learned along the way.
Yeah. So we got back together with the feeling that that we were the right choice.
Yes.
We were making a good choice by being together. Not that we were soulmates and that the other person was the one. We had let go of that idea.
Yeah.
But we had gone through all the soul searching to figure out that us being together was a good and healthy choice. And we also set up some harder boundaries on our second relationship. We had done a pretty good job on our first relationship of maintaining, I like to say personal holiness when I'm talking about sexual purity, just because I think it's bigger than just sexual purity. It's also language and action. Our first relationship was okay with that. We were really firm in our second relationship. We're not going to kiss.
Yeah.
We created some really strict guidelines for ourselves.
Yeah.
With the goal of just having a relationship that was as wholesome and founded in goodness as possible, I think.
Yeah. Again, we're not saying that every relationship needs to be that way. It's just for us in our current relationship, 2.0 is what we used to call it, 1.0 and 2.0. We said 2.0 is just going to be a little bit different because we're different people now.
Yeah. So fast forward, we got engaged, we got married, all good things. By the time our marriage rolled around, the romance was back, I think.
Of course.
Yeah. Stephen, we had a wonderful relationship the second time around. I felt more secure and more in love with you as time went on because there was just this peace of this is the person that I've chosen to be with and it's a good choice. And that brought so much security. Everything went really smoothly with the engagement.
Yeah, I think security is a big factor. I had been hurt in a previous relationship, and like Megan said earlier, I am one of those people that loves to give people the benefit of the doubt. And that even goes for my significant others. And with Megan, like this time around, and not that I struggled with like insecurity necessarily about like who you're talking to, who you hanging out with, because we were adults, like we were involved in ministries, we're going to be around other people of the
you've
opposite
never been
sex.
like a jealous person.
No, I'm not a jealous person by any means. But I do have to say that because of how we got back together, there was this like factor of choice.
Yeah, there was no question.
Yeah, it was because it wasn't about hormones, because it wasn't about the butterflies and the hype of it all, and that you are the one mindset. Like, I was so confident that you loved me.
Yeah.
Because I know the soul searching you went through.
Yeah.
I knew the questions you were asking and your intentions. And so when I thought about you as my significant other, then eventually my spouse, like through thick and thin, we chose each other.
Yeah. And that ended up being really crucial for us. So we're going to skip ahead a little bit to our first year of marriage. And for anyone who's listening who's been married before, I think we can all say that the first couple of years of marriage are hard, no matter how wonderful of a relationship foundation you have, because you have to learn how to live with another human being and make all kinds of adjustments and concessions and set up new practices. And it's wonderful. Like, it's a great time. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But it has significant challenges.
Yeah.
And for us, the biggest one came in the form of Stephen both of us going through.
Well, you started it first, lady.
I did.
Don't put me as the scapegoat.
That's true. Both of us went through career changes, and that doesn't sound like it should be all that big of a deal, but you have to understand the identities that we were bringing into our marriage. Yeah. So I just mentioned this in the last episode. I had gone through a master's degree in religious studies, and at the time I felt a conviction. I mean, a deep desire to go get a PhD and become a professor and really make secular academia my mission field.
Yeah.
I wanted to go work in colleges and universities. Stephen was headed to nursing school.
Now, when we were married, I was in nursing school.
Yeah. And that had always been something that you had talked about.
I was halfway through my nursing program when we got married.
Yeah. And we had really developed some identities around those two things, right? I had started to fashion an identity for myself as a quote unquote academic, and you were really, that nursing desire in you was really deeply embedded.
Oh, I'd been there since I was in high school. Like I said in an earlier episode, that when my father passed away, I was surrounded by nurses in my household
for years of your life.
Yeah. So my dad got sick when I was 4 with Lou Gehrig's disease. And from the time I was 4 to the time I was 12, there was healthcare professionals in my house. And so I saw the impact or lack of impact that a nurse or a medical professional had if they did their job correctly. And I knew that I had the stomach to do it. I had helped my mom change my dad. I gave my dad shots. I gave my dad medicine. I fed him. I helped bathe him. I took him to the restroom, all before the age of 10. So for me, when junior year came around and you were thinking about careers, nursing just made sense.
Yeah. So both of us had this sort of predetermined career paths, and we had fashioned our marriage around those ideas too. Like we had said, well, Stephen, I'll go to work while Stephen finishes nursing school, and then while he's wrapping up nursing school, I'll start looking for PhD programs, and we'll just move to wherever,
Yeah, we had the mindset that she's going to have to find a needle in a haystack job,
right.
And I, as a nurse, can find a job anywhere.
Right, because, academia, especially if you're in a field like religious studies where there's not like a ton of jobs lying around, you just have to go where the jobs are. And if that's North Dakota or that's Texas or that's Europe, you have to pick up and go wherever, they're going to hire you, because there really isn't that much out there. And we had sort of settled on that. And by the grace of God, I ended up working a job that I really hated. I went to work actually at my undergrad alma mater in an admissions office, and the people I worked with were and are lovely people. It was just a soul crushing job. It was really boring.
She's literally in a storage closet with no windows, one single door, and everything behind her was shelves of just like files.
Boxes. Yeah. My office was a closet, and I was bored, and I can't handle boredom well. Like, I was bored for large stretches of time. So I listened to a lot of podcasts, and I read a lot of books, and I thought a lot about things at that job. I had more than enough time on my hands to really think. And I realized I had sort of a second reckoning about my values. I realized in that job that I didn't want to go into academia because I didn't like the kind of person I thought I would become. You know, working at a university, I was getting a behind the scenes view of what the reality of that life looked like. And it was really messy and kind of toxic. And that's not to say that every academic job or every school is like that. But, you know, I just wasn't liking the trajectory that I was on anymore. And so I started to question whether or not being an academic was my identity. And so I decided to not pursue a PhD program. And I started looking for different jobs. And I moved into the company that I'm with now, working in software, which was kind of a pivot that I hadn't seen. And the job transition is less important than the idea that we opened ourselves up to completely transforming our identities. And
yeah, right. We had a complete identity shift, which you usually marry someone, you know, in a lot of cases, people marry someone because of their identities. And if they truly just fell in love with what they did for a living instead of who that person was at their core, that could have been devastation, you know, for a marriage.
Right. So I mean, let's be real though. I went from going to get a PhD to working for a software company. Your transition was a little bit harder to swallow.
It was.
You want to explain?
Sure. So, without getting too in the nitty-gritty, basically what happened, I was in the throes of nursing school, and I was over halfway through my program at this point, and I had completed all my skills, which basically, as a nurse, and when you're in school, you have to complete a skills book, basically, and you have to have passed all of those skills before you graduate, and you only get like maybe 2 attempts, and that's it. And if you fail a certain amount of skills, you're out of the program. Well, I was through that. So I had all the skills of a nurse. I was just finishing up a couple of the last classes. But during this process, I had my friend Theo, who was a beekeeper on the side, and I didn't know that. I overheard him in conversation one day talking about bees, and I was like, who in the heck is a beekeeper these days? Like, I knew nothing about it, y'all. Like, I was very ignorant, but I started talking to him about it, and he started answering my questions. And we were also study partners, so as nurses do, sometimes you procrastinate on actually doing the studying. We found conversations to talk about, but I dove really deep into asking him a lot of questions about bees, and he was talking about how he did it on the side for an extra source of income. Well, I found it extremely fascinating, and it's kind of a common trope for beekeepers who find beekeeping later in life. Like, people who find it become obsessed with it and dive deep into it just because of how fascinating of creatures they are. So long story short, he invited me out to his bee yard after a couple months of asking him questions, and I was going home and doing tons of research. And so when he brought me out there and I went into my first bee yard for the first time, it was, I don't believe in magic, but it was a magical experience. It was like,
You fell in love.
I really did. And y'all, I lived in South Florida, and it was in July. And my friend who taught me beekeeping wore a full suit and 3 pairs of socks and 2 pairs of gloves.
The white beekeeping suit, like the space suit looking thing with the veil.
Like, so
very hot.
They're patented to be breathable, but when you're covered in clothes, unless you get into those things wearing like close to nothing underneath, they're not breathable. And so I was fully suited, standing in a bee yard in July in South Florida, West Palm Beach, and fell absolutely in love while I was sweating beyond belief.
Right.
And,
go ahead.
And so I had a shift of, I'm not going to lie to you, I got scared.
Yeah.
For a little while.
Steven comes home and is like, I can like, you're not good at keeping
Oh,
your feelings to yourself.
well, to you, no.
To anybody, babe. Let's be real. Like that is, you are not a poker player. That is not one of your core strengths. So I can tell that Steven is just like, he's fixated on this idea of beekeeping. That's nothing new. Like,
Yeah, she knew. I've been talking to her about bees for a couple months at this point.
right. Like, he'd gotten into it. I'm like, oh, this is a cool, interesting hobby. And like, Theo had like given us a hive, like a hive body as like a late wedding present, which was really sweet. And, so all these different things are happening. I'm like, okay, this is a cool hobby for him. And he starts talking about making a career out of it. And I start panicking inside. And
yeah, well, I mean, and at this point I had done a lot of research into it and saw that there was a potential career opportunity that could be made out of it.
Right. There's too much detail for us to go into that on this podcast. But if you aren't aware, like commercial beekeeping is actually a very lucrative. It can be a very lucrative.
It can be very lucrative, but it's also very work intensive.
Right. So that was the track that he was sort of becoming obsessed with. And what he didn't know at the time is that this whole discussion of him potentially leaving school right before he finished, leaving a program that guaranteed a lot of security, to go do this wild entrepreneurial venture was massively triggering for me.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because, without going into too much detail, my parents had a very similar experience early in their marriage where my dad dropped out of school to go build a business. But they point back to that as maybe the hardest experience of their early marriage. And it was really a challenge for them to work through that. I mean, I think that cloud defined my early childhood to a degree. And so when Steven starts coming up with this plan in our first year of marriage to drop out of nursing school to become a beekeeper, my whole little vision and story that I had told myself about what our life was going to look like starts to fall apart. And the security.
I do want to preface that this came after her career crisis.
Yeah, but my career had a 401k. Like you're talking about, I made a move toward more security by getting out of academia to a degree.
That's fair.
Steven was talking about doing something that seemed so out of the blue. And so it was ground shaking for us. Like, I mean, it really shook me.
So my dad and my family are filled with entrepreneurs. Like my dad, my uncle, my dad and five of my uncles are actually all entrepreneurs of their own very successful businesses. And so for me, this risk was a risk. It wasn't like I was ignoring the risk factor of it, but it wasn't as big of a jump for me.
Right. So, and we're figuring each other out. We're newlyweds. Steven doesn't know that this is, to him, this is just an interesting adventure. Like, this is a cool idea. He's worked out the details. He thinks it's totally feasible. He doesn't know that I'm having a psychological meltdown about, rewriting history.
Well, on top of that though, I was a lot like Megan was seeing the people in academia and what kind of people what kind of a person she would have to be successful in academia, and that she didn't want to be that way. I was also in nursing school, going to my clinicals and working with nurses that have done this for 30 and 40 years, and seeing the gambit of different types of nurses that worked in the field. And it usually is broken down into two categories. They're doing it. The first category is they're doing it because it makes a decent income, but they're not passionate about it. And then there's the other field of people who are passionate about it and will do whatever they can to make their patients comfortable. And I saw that both of those parties were still exhausted, emotionally, mentally. I heard stories about nurses, like while I was working alongside of them, they were talking about how they've had to miss their kids' dance recitals, and how that their daughter gave birth the other day, but they had to work a double shift, and she couldn't go there to be there to support her daughter because they had a shortage on nurses. And like, I'm hearing all of these things, and I'm saying to myself, is this the kind of family person I want to be?
Right. And this is in 2017. So this is before COVID.
Yeah, this is pre-COVID.
And the nursing landscape was already really bleak.
Yeah.
Like, I think you were looking at a life of overwork potentially.
Well, on top of that, though, because I had lost my father at such a young age, I knew that when we had kids, I wanted to be a very intentional father.
Yeah.
And it was my goal that no job was going to keep me from being able to be there to support my kids.
Right.
And so when I saw this opportunity as a beekeeper, don't get me wrong, I fell in love with bees, but I was also seeing the side of nursing that I knew did not align with my values. Even though there's plenty of nurses out there that are fantastic parents. I don't want you all to think that I think nurses are bad parents. I'm just saying, for my values and where I wanted to be in life, and from what I saw, I wanted to be more present as I could be. And beekeeping, even though it is a labor-intensive job, I still would make the schedule.
Right. And so what you guys are hearing happening with this conflict in our marriage that showed up, and like, we never yelled at each other about this. I cried about it. Like, we had some really intense discussions. But it created a wound, I think. Like, this process really did create a wound in our marriage, because I felt like you were throwing away my security to chase this wild and crazy dream at the time. And I had this fear that this was going to dominate our marriage, that we were going to struggle with the outcomes of this for years. And I want you guys to understand, I'm pretty sure every couple goes through some version of this moment that we're about to talk about, which is the did I make a mistake moment. Yeah. Like, I think every married couple probably has a moment in their marriage, maybe it's early, maybe it's a little bit later, where they look at the person they're married to and ask the question, what if I made the wrong choice? Yeah. And this was mine. Like, I was looking at what you were choosing to do. And in retrospect, we can look back and sort of laugh about where we ended up, because it ended up taking us down this wonderful path. Like, we've had our life since has really been fantastic. And the choice you made, the values-driven choice you made to prioritize family, was one of the best decisions you could have made for us in the long term. But I didn't know that at the time. Yeah. So I was asking myself that question, am I sure I made the right choice? And this is the thing that, if you take away nothing else from our whole story, this is what we want you to hear. We were able to get through that moment with, like, so much less angst and tears and frustration and bitterness and anger than we've seen a lot of other couples have, because we had already answered that question. Yeah. We decided before we started dating again, before we got engaged, before we got married, that we were choosing each other for the right reasons. And those reasons had not changed. Like, your career path changed, but the core values that we had identified in each other were the same. And we had already decided point blank that that's what we wanted for ourselves. So this crisis of identity was hard. Yeah. But when I say that it shook us, I mean, it shook us for a couple of months. Yeah. Yeah. And then we were okay. Yeah.
And the thing is it wasn't like a couple of months of passive aggression either.
No.
It was a couple months of weekly, at first daily, then eventually weekly check-ins of just debriefing and talking about what's going on and talking about our thought process. And some weeks were harder than others. Right. But at the end of the day, we were absolutely transparent with one another.
Yeah, and it came back to those values that we'd identified at the beginning. Like, we didn't have to linger in that question of, did we make a mistake or not? Yeah. And I think that's why we don't have to go into all the details of where our careers went after that, because there's too much to talk about. But those choices that we made early on, and the choice to believe the best in each other because of the values identification we had done, has made the first 7 years of our marriage beautiful. And I'm going to use the term easy. Like, we've come through some challenges, but that was the first and the last time that I've ever questioned whether or not we were meant meant, quote unquote,
Yeah.
whether or not we were meant to be together or whether or not we had made the right choice for each other. Like we did that. We came through it. We withstood that question. And what has followed has been pretty amazing. Like
It's been amazing.
it's been great. Like I feel like, and this isn't a comparison game. We don't want to ever pass judgment on other couples, but we have friends whose early years of marriage have been much more challenging by comparison. And I think, with the help of God and great ministers and mentors, they're working through those things. And, thank God for anointed marriage counseling and all the other resources that we have available. That's great. We didn't have to go through as much of that from the get-go. And it changed how we parented. I think it changed how we did our finances. It's affected everything.
I really think that, and again, we don't think that this has to be everyone's journey, but that breakup in our relationship, not our marriage, really set the foundation for us to ask critically, why are we in a relationship? What are we looking for in a spouse?
Yeah.
Are you looking for a pretty face or someone that you can go on a journey with?
Yeah,
Don't get me wrong. I think my wife is absolutely stunning.
Well, thank you.
But it's one of those things that I hate to say it this way, there's bigger questions to ask than are you just physically attracted to someone?
No, and we should point this out too. Like we've changed in a lot of other ways in our marriage. I'm just to put it out there. I've gained 60 pounds since we got married.
Yeah.
Like my body is very different. I've had 2 babies.
Yeah.
Things are not in the same place that they used to be.
I don't even have the excuse of babies.
You haven't gained 60 pounds.
I've gained a significant amount of weight since our marriage bodies.
Look, toddlers will stress you out, man, and both of us are stress eaters, so we're working on that. But, our bodies have changed.
Yeah.
I think we are less conventionally attractive than we were at the beginning of our relationship, probably. More attracted to each other, but less attractive to someone on the street.
There's a lot of caveating in this conversation, but we both love each other dearly.
Yeah, we do. We're having a great time. I just want you guys to know. And so, that change has been a non-issue, really. In our, I've struggled more with my body than it's never been something that's been a problem in our marriage, right? Our finances, like everyone else, this period of time since the pandemic, economically has been really challenging. Jobs have been hard. Childcare is expensive. Yeah. Our economic struggles have not defined our marriage. Mm-hmm. I think the takeaway from this is that having those conversations in our dating relationship and identifying our values and making that intentional choice has made the natural challenges that will show up in every marriage much easier for us to navigate together because we're looking at the same compass.
Yep.
We don't question someone's, I don't question your fit for me as a husband. Yeah. Because we decided that we fit. Yeah, we made the choice.
We both have the same true north.
Yeah. So you guys have now heard all the ins and outs of our story. And again, we're not here to prescribe what you should do in your dating relationship or to say that everyone's relationship should look like ours. But we want you to sort of take inspiration from the idea that intentional dating and choosing a partner based on their values and the values that you're bringing into the relationship sets you up for a marriage that is successful and easy and good. We want that for everyone. I wish I could snap my fingers and give every young couple that toolkit that I feel like we, to some degree we stumbled into it.
Yeah. Stumbled is, I honestly believe that we were allowing ourselves to be led.
I think God equipped us. By the grace of God.
I think because we were willing to be molded.
Yeah.
God opened up doors for us to be able to learn these lessons.
Yeah. So future episodes, we won't be spending as much time talking about our experiences. Just to give you a sense, we wanted to lay the groundwork so you guys understood why this was important to us. But we're going to tackle some other topics. So we're going to talk about physical attractiveness and how that should play into relationships. We're going to talk about how to identify your own values. We're going to talk about The challenges of long distance dating, of finding someone that you align with, of learning your own sort of barriers to relationships and how to break those down so you can connect with people. We have a lot of topics in the tank that we're excited to talk about. And we also want to be opening ourselves up to questions.
Yeah.
So
if you have questions, you can go to the description of this podcast and we'll have an email for you guys to be able to send in questions, and we will try tackling them to the best of our ability.
yeah, so we're excited to interact with you on this, and we just hope that it inspires you and that you get some value out of it as well. If you're curious about the Synchrony Project and what we do, you can follow us on social media, Instagram and Facebook. You can check out our website, synchronyproject.com. If you're interested in Apostolic Matchmaking right now, we are in our pre-launch phase for our relaunch of matchmaking. So we've been doing it for since last summer, and then we sort of pushed pause and closed our survey pipeline because we're going to start putting a more formal process in place and a pricing structure so that we can spend more of our time doing this.
Yeah. And so, the pricing structure is just to give us more time to be able to matchmake y'all.
Yeah, and
It'll
provide
give us
resources.
more freedom to be able to do that.
Yeah, so we're so excited. We'll talk more about the launch in our next episode probably so that you guys have more details about what's coming. But in the meantime, thank you for listening. Let us know if you have questions.
Thanks, y'all.
Hey, babe.
Huh.
I love you.
I love you.
Thank you for doing this with me.
Likewise.
All right, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.